So, WWE legend superstar Billy Graham says that Kofi Kingston going to WrestleMania for the WWE title is a joke. Yeah, well, let's see. I don't know about this one. Sup, y'all? Welcome back to the review space, and I'm reading this article. It's already a couple of days old. It's actually kind of an older story from March 27, 2019 on WrestlingInc.com. But according to Billy Graham, yes, the legendary superstar Billy Graham, former WWF champion, or WWE champion, back in the late 70s, I think. He was the transitional champion that held a title between, I want to say, I think it was Bruno Sammartino on his second run, and then he was the one who defeated Bruno. Then he held it for quite a few months, and then he lost it to Bob Backlund in the late 70s, and Bob Backlund held it for like the next 5 or 6 years. Just an incredibly long time between the late 70s, early 1980s. So, kind of a big deal, superstar Billy Graham. Even though he was considered a transitional back in the day, he wasn't a long-term champion, but in a lot of ways, he was a very influential and highly groundbreaking champion for the time, and he would definitely be one of the most important, superstars ever, and no pun intended. He was superstar Billy Graham, the very muscular, very roided up, a lot of steroided up look. He had that huge physique, very muscular guy. He looked like a heavyweight. He could talk. He could cut a promo. He had some charisma. He was just a very... He really was the template for, the modern wrestler. He became the modern template, or at least the template for guys like a Hulk Hogan, guys like a Scott Steiner, guys like even a Macho Man Randy Savage, and Ultimate Warrior, guys that were very muscular looking and had a huge jacked up physiques and incredibly impressive bodybuilder looking physiques. Superstar Billy Graham was in many ways the earliest version of that. He was the innovator of that look. He was the first of that kind to really become, a top guy and become this incredibly marketable, very charismatic guy. This larger than life, like really cool looking. He looked like a superhero. And even his name, Superstar Billy Graham. I think it's just a personal theory of mine, but I think that's why they call them WWE superstars. I think that's where it comes from. It's like, Vince McMahon or whoever is in charge of marketing. Like, we got to call these guys superstars. We got to call them WWF superstars or WWE superstars. We have to call them a superstar, and I think that is a tribute or a nod or just something that was started by the Superstar Billy Graham, moniker. Billy Graham was the first superstar because he looked like a superstar. He looked like a larger-than-life superhero bodybuilder type. He just had that incredible physique. He looked he looked like a physical specimen. So, you have to understand where Superstar Billy Graham is coming from. And let's go take a look at this article, because I feel like I kind of rambled about Superstar Billy Graham. It feels almost like I'm defending him, but I'm just trying to kind of give a background of what this guy accomplished back in the day. Superstar Billy Graham is not just some jabroni nobody. I mean, this guy is a made guy. He's a Hall of Famer, WWE Hall of Famer. He's become, WWE champion at a time when it was very, very rare for anybody to, defeat Bruno Sammartino or just have one up over the WWF top guys like a Bruno or a Pedro Morales or somebody like that. I mean, he became one of the top heels, one of the greatest heels of all time, and again, one of the most influential pro wrestlers of all time. And he was imitated by stars after him in one way, shape, or another, whether it was his promo style or his look, what I'm saying? So, but let's go take a look at this particular article and see exactly what Superstar Billy Graham specifically said about Kofi Kingston. So, this was his reaction to WWE SmackDown this past week, where Big E and Xavier Woods, they had that tag team gauntlet, and then if they won, Kofi would end up actually facing Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania this year. He would finally be in it. So, they won, and so Kofi and them are celebrating. Got a big pop from the crowd. It was a very memorable moment, very exciting. Like, you feel good for these guys for finally winning and finally giving Kofi that shot. So superstar Billy Graham actually gets at, Kofi. He ends up taking a shot at him at, I think, what was it? Was it a Facebook post or a Twitter post? It might have been on, anyway, it was on social media. Yeah, I think it was Facebook. On social media, and this is what Billy Graham had to say. Is the WWE serious? I turned on my computer today and went to the wrestling news sites, and what did I see? Kofi Kingston versus Daniel Bryan for the WWE Championship at Mania. Talk is Vince is going to put that WWE belt on Kofi. We'll have a 145-pound WWE champion. So he basically called Kofi Kingston a 145-pound wrestler. And I think for the record, Kofi Kingston is not 145 pounds. He's heavier than that, but and he's not a small guy. I think he's actually physically bigger than Daniel Bryan. But anyway, he continues. So this must have been an idea, but a new senior creative lady, Dana Warrior, Dave Meltzer says she has been promoted to an extremely high position on the creative team and attends meetings that only Vince, I guess Triple H, and Steph are in. Man, how did she get so smart? My friend Hannibal, I guess this might be Hannibal from Hannibal TV. Hannibal has been monitoring the Monday Night Raw steady decline in TV viewership. Well, Hannibal, it dropped again last night in Boston, Monday, March 25th. Steady decline in TV viewership. I predict that this year's Mania will be so bad that next year, 2020, will not come close to selling out. The thrill is gone. Is anyone out there really excited to see these two lightweights wrestle for the WWE Championship? Oh, one more thing. I would love to see Kofi at 145 pounds put his newly won WWE belt on the line against Brock Lesnar. Great logistics. One man being outweighed by a good 135 pounds. A total joke this thing is. Superstar Billy Graham. Man, and listen. And then this post got over 700 comments as of this video. Almost 800 actually. 791 comments. So it definitely riled up a lot of attention from the fans. And I'm taking a look at the comment section here. Most people seem to be defending Kofi, so they're on Kofi's side, and they're basically calling out Superstar Billy Graham for being bitter. They're calling him a bitter old man, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And Superstar Billy Graham wasn't that great. He was never good in the ring. He's past his prime. He's just a bitter old guy. And so a lot of the commenters here is going after Billy Graham and making fun of him, or just, talking about how he's a bitter old geezer, like he's irrelevant. What I'm saying? Basically just disrespecting Superstar Billy Graham. And I can understand why. They're trying to defend Kofi, who has gained quite a bit of a following, and he is, in my opinion, I already made a video about it. Does Kofi Kingston deserve to main event WrestleMania 35 against Daniel Bryan for the WWE title? And I've already talked about my piece with, overall, I completely do think that Kofi can win the WWE Championship. I do think that he's talented enough on the mic, in the ring. He's popular enough. He's sold merchandise. He's done all these different things. I think he's a good, he could be a champion. I think that. I think that there's a possibility. I think that, Kofi is good. He's a very good performer. And he's over. So, I'm saying, somebody who's relatively popular with the crowd, somebody who is well received, and the fans generally want to see him and are, kind of behind him. Even though, it came out of nowhere. Or it's like a last-minute replacement, or a last-minute decision, or, it feels a little bit too kind of rushed. Oh, well, I'll take it. I'll take anybody that gets over like that. WWE needs stars. They need people that the fan base can get behind, that the WWE fans can cheer for. Instead of just some boring, non-charismatic, a complete failure of a champion. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think Kofi's good. I think Kofi is good. Do I think he could have been built up a lot better? Of course. Obviously. They could have been starting to build him up months ago, in late 2018, early 2019, instead of just the way that they shoehorned him in not even shoehorned, but the way that they kind of, he was just basically a replacement tag team guy. But, again, Kofi's talented enough to do it. And so most of the people here in the comment section, almost 800 comments, most of them are basically going after superstar Billy Graham. Some of them are agreeing with Billy Graham on this. Like, they're saying, I can understand, like, Kofi, I'm not on the hype train. You know what I'm saying? I think Kofi is, I haven't bought into it yet, and superstar is right. Like, you got a few comments here and there saying that Billy Graham is correct in that, Kofi isn't big enough. He's not physically large enough to be this convincing heavyweight champion. But the large majority of the commenters are basically coming down superstar Billy Graham's throat. What an awfully bitter man, the ungracious rantings of Billy Graham. You know what I'm saying? So all these different things, all these different comments are, most of them are basically criticizing Billy Graham. And you got to understand the time period when Billy Graham was on top. In his prime, like, this guy had a head full of hair. He was a blonde-haired evil heel, a villain. He was very charismatic for the time. He had some good promos for the time. He was an oiled-up, muscular-looking, bodybuilder-looking guy, so he was definitely a heavyweight. He looked like a heavyweight. He looked like a star. He definitely looked like a celebrity. A larger-than-life, incredible look. And I'm not really entirely sure what happened later on in his career, because I was way too young. I was born in 87. This guy peaked like 10 years, or about, 8 or 9 years before I was even born. So, you can watch his clips on YouTube, and watching his interview segments on YouTube back in the late 70s, early 80s, I wasn't quite sure exactly what happened to his career, where he kind of fell off and never became a WWE champion again. He was WWE champion for several months, maybe like several months between the reigns of Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund. And so he kind of held that belt and became the dominant heel, at least for a few months, but he never got back on top in WWE again, and I'm not entirely sure what the falling out, or what happened between him and the WWE or WWF back in the day. And I guess even at the time when he was on top, it was probably, I would say it was Vince McMahon Sr., Vince McMahon's father back in the day, in the late 70s, that he was the guy that put the strap on him. And so this was years before Hulk Hogan, and when, before Vince McMahon, the current Vince McMahon Jr., that's been in charge, for the past well over 3 decades now, before he took the reins and before he became the head of WWF and, made it a national, mainstream, international brand company. He took it out of the territories. But, again, Billy Graham was a good template for that early muscular bodybuilder type guy. Before guys like Hulk Hogan, before guys like Macho Man Randy Savage, before guys like Ultimate Warrior, before guys like Lex Luger, guys like Scott Steiner, even to a certain degree, even guys like Goldberg, just these muscular big dudes, guys that look like bodybuilders, that kind of has a Adonis physique, guys like Chris Masters, and I'm trying to think of like the modern like muscular dudes now, guys like EC3 to a certain degree, EC3 and I'm trying to think of body guys that have that incredible muscular physique. Yeah, even to a lesser extent, like Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns looks like a heavyweight, even though he's got his body mostly covered up with his gear. His Shield gear and all that. He's still got that, big muscular arms and all that. 6'3", 6'2", however big he is. Even guys like a Brock Lesnar, which Billy Graham mentioned and compared to Kofi. And listen, I can understand some of why Billy Graham talks like this. He's a legitimate heavyweight. He's been on top. He fits more in line with guys like a Triple H. Guys like Triple H and Batista and Scott Steiner and these big jacked up muscular heavyweights. That's kind of like his thing. That's his body type. You know what I'm saying? The guys that have that huge jacked up physique. Even John Cena. John Cena with his jacked up physique. Over 6 feet tall. A legitimate heavyweight and all that. That's what he likes. I'm sure that's what he prefers because that's what he is. He prefers guys to be legitimate heavyweights the way that he was back in the late 70s as the top guy, the top champion in WWE. You know what I'm saying? He that's his personal belief. That's his personal mentality. And I can understand that. I kind of look at heavyweights as more believable than the smaller guys, no doubt, in terms of wrestling, in terms of athletic, like combat sports, obviously, even something like a boxing where, the heavyweight division is more believable than obviously the smaller guys. You take, a heavyweight boxing champion against a small, like, flyweight or a lightweight or whatever, and, they would absolutely get demolished in a one-on-one, one-on-one duel, in a one-on-one actual event. I mean, you can be the best small weight kind of champion, or whatever the weight divisions are in the smaller division. You could be somebody like a Floyd Mayweather or a Manny Pacquiao, or even in UFC like a Conor McGregor, and facing off against like a legitimate heavyweight. Somebody who's an actual, over 200 pounds, over 6 feet tall. Usually those guys would be absolutely decimating the smaller guys. I'm saying? You take Conor McGregor and all his bravado and all his charisma, but you face him off against a legitimate heavyweight in the UFC, whether it's Stipe or what's that guy, that Ngannou guy, or anybody that's like a legitimate heavyweight with incredible power, incredible punching power ability, and somebody that can absolutely like destroy Conor McGregor in a one-on-one match. It wouldn't even be a fair fight. It wouldn't be fair at all. Conor would lose so easily, to a heavyweight. I don't think he'd even have he wouldn't even really have a real chance unless the guy is in a coma, unless his opponent that's a heavyweight is in a complete coma. And same thing goes for the smaller boxers, guys like a Floyd Mayweather or a Pacquiao or whoever is on top at the moment, whoever's on top of boxing. There's some, who's the other Mexican wrestlers? Is it Marquez or I forget? There's so many younger boxers now. I forget. Pretty much most of them. Is it Alvarez? I think Alvarez is another guy. Canelo Alvarez, that guy. Yeah, have these guys face off against, Mike Tyson in his prime. And Mike Tyson wasn't the biggest heavyweight, but the guy is still a heavyweight. He was still in that heavyweight division. Have these guys face off against, like, Muhammad Ali in his prime. Or George Foreman in his prime. Oh my God. It wouldn't even be close. Mayweather, Pacquiao, Canelo Alvarez, all these guys would get bodied by Ali, by George Foreman, you know what I'm saying, in their primes. And even the who are those guys from Eastern Europe? I always forget their names. The Eastern European, they were heavyweight champions for the longest time. I always forget their name. I think they're from Eastern Europe. I don't think they're Russian. They're like Georgian fighters. They're from the Eastern European areas. I always forget their names. But they were boxing champions in the 2000s, and they dominated the heavyweight division for a long time. A long, long time. You know what I'm saying? So heavyweights are they're on a different level than the lightweight or the small weight, flyweight, whatever, small, bantamweight, whatever you want to call them. Whatever the small weight divisions are. The welterweight division, It's like... So I understand where he's coming from. Anyway, I understand where Billy Graham is coming from in terms of that size. You have somebody like a Brock Lesnar. And listen, Brock took on Kofi remember, in Japan, I think this was, I want to say this was 2014 maybe 2014, 2015, something like that, like a few years ago, where he took on Kofi Kingston in one of those Japanese house shows. I think it might have been like the Beast in the East, where Brock Lesnar made an appearance. He had that one-off little match, like house show match, and he took on a random opponent, just some random jobber. And at the time, it was Kofi Kingston, and they were doing the New Day stuff. And after he easily defeated Kofi, and he just, he threw around Kofi like he was a rag doll. I mean, he gave him Germans after Germans after German suplex. And he easily defeated Kofi in that squash match. And then I think the New Day came out afterwards, and then even they got their butts handed to them by Brock Lesnar. So he basically destroyed all of the New Day members just by himself. So, obviously in a legitimate UFC match, I mean, I would definitely think that, my God, Brock Lesnar would dominate Kofi. But of course, you can kind of understand why somebody, a much bigger guy like Lesnar, can easily dominate Kofi in a worked wrestling match, although I think that would be a fun match if they actually had that legitimate, Kofi's now a main eventer, let's say he's a WWE champion, and have him face off against Brock. I think that would be kind of a fun small guy versus big guy, the same way that, Brock has a history of that with Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, soon to be Seth Rollins. He's had the match against Finn Balor. These smaller guys that are more cruiserweight looking and more kind of lightweight looking, or light heavyweight, and they're not his size, they're not in his physical size range, they're not 280 pounds and 6'2", 6'3". He has a certain chemistry with the smaller guys, and I think that would be that could be a really good match. I would think that Brock definitely would get the W, but, if Kofi is being booked strong, there's still a chance of him, again, in a fake wrestling match, you could have Kofi defeat Brock, and have maybe the New Day come in and do some interference and all that, and have it kind of like be a feel-good David versus Goliath kind of thing, where you have the smaller guy, Kofi, as WWE Champion, defending his belt against the big bad boss, Brock Lesnar, the big evil, big monster, big beast of a, this large, physically imposing guy, this legitimate super heavyweight going up against little Kofi, and kind of have that David versus Goliath feel good win. You can definitely book. I mean, you can book because again, it's fake wrestling. So we're talking about fake fictional storylines, and you can kind of make it up as you go along. There's a fake narrative there. This isn't legitimate combat sports, and I think that's the main difference between fake WWE, fake sports entertainment, professional wrestling, which is not legitimate. It's more like live action theater, kind of a stunt show mixed with soap opera. It's like a live action Game of Thrones kind of thing, or live action anime. So it's not really the same thing, exact same thing as combat sports, like legitimate sports and athletic events like UFC MMA or boxing or something like that, where you have legitimate combat. And it really does matter if you're a bigger person, a physically bigger, more powerful individual. I get where Billy Graham is coming from. I understand his point of view. He is a heavyweight, and he was one of the most influential guys. So he's a legend, no doubt. Got a lot of respect for Billy Graham, and what he did and what he contributed for the business. He changed business, WWE. He changed wrestling. You know what I'm saying? It made it larger than life. I understand that. In a lot of ways, because the wrestling has changed and modern WWE has changed, where the smaller guys now have a higher chance of making it, especially if they're really solid in the ring, and then you mix that with pretty good charisma, guys like an Eddie Guerrero, guys like even Chris Benoit to a degree, although I would say that he wasn't as charismatic as Eddie Guerrero. Guys like Rey Mysterio, who had a really popular following, he was very popular amongst fans. Who became world champion. Those are guys that got criticism too. They got their fair share of criticism. You know, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, they were called the Vanilla Midgets by big guys like Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is a 7 foot, 300 pounds, over 300 pound, big monster. Big, towering, stud of an athlete. The guy's so huge. And he was the longest reigning single run WWE title reign in the 90s. Back in that mid 90s as Diesel. You know what I'm saying? This was before the smaller, like super small guys like Eddie and Chris and Rey Mysterio started winning championships. Granted, he was facing off against guys like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, who were significantly smaller than him. But even Bret and Shawn, they were still a little bit bigger than Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and guys like Daniel Bryan, and guys like Ricochet and Finn Balor. So I think size does matter, and I can understand why some people love having that size. Look, I think it's great too. You know what I'm saying? I think it's great to have that physically imposing look, and it does add to the character. But, man, I can make an exception for Kofi. I think most of us can, because he's got charisma. He's got mic skills. He's good in the ring. And he's paid his dues. And he sold merchandise. And, it's not like Kofi's the smallest guy. He's not like 4'9", he's not like super small, super tiny, like Rey Mysterio, or even somebody like a Finn Balor. Kofi isn't that small. He's just kind of an average-looking guy in terms of his build, kind of a medium-sized guy. Maybe a little bit more on the light heavyweight side than the 200, exactly 200 pounds. Maybe he's a little bit beneath that. Maybe he's about 170, 180 maximum. I know WWE, they kind of inflate these numbers. They would kind of inflate the poundage there. But, you can make an exception for Kofi. You can make an exception. And look, listen, superstar Billy Graham is entitled to his opinion. I know he's been very vocal on social media in the past several years. He's criticized so many different things. He's run his mouth so much. And I agree with some of it. I disagree with some of it, He's entitled to his opinion. It's just that you can make an exception for Kofi this time around. He's charismatic enough, to warrant, I think, a title run and somebody that could legitimately be a star. Because at the end of the day, it's fake wrestling. If you can watch an anime, like a popular TV show like Dragon Ball Z, where you have small, tiny Goku, or relatively small, tiny Goku, being able to dominate and physically have a martial arts, a convincing battle against a big guy like Broly, or a bigger guy, a bigger opponent like Nappa. You know what I'm saying? Remember those classic moments in DBZ? Goku versus Nappa, Goku versus Broly, Goku versus Cell, Goku versus Majin Buu, or Vegeta versus Majin. You know what I'm saying? Like Vegeta, who's even shorter and smaller than Goku, and Vegeta is dominating the much bigger opponents. Most of his opponents are physically bigger than him, and it's it size doesn't matter. Because these guys are really powered up, incredibly powerful, energetic, beings. They're like gods almost. You know what I'm saying? The way that they're like Superman. And that's another fictional character. Superman going up against Doomsday, or Superman going up against a much bigger opponent, like a giant monster. It's because it's fictional, and wrestling is set in a fictional world, just like comic books and anime and manga and all these fictional pieces of entertainment in the media. Because wrestling, you can write the narrative, you can write anything and everything. There's no limits to it, You can write Kofi being a convincing champion as long as you push him the right way, as long as you give him those fun moments and those entertaining, memorable moments of glory, and make him look strong and make him look good and have him look like a winner instead of a loser. so that people will have reason to cheer for him and want to go on his journey into the road to WrestleMania, his journey of being the first ever full black WWE champion. That's an exciting story for a lot of people. So I think Billy Graham, he does sound bitter for sure, but he is what it is. I accept Billy Graham for what his comments and all that. Like, I get where he's coming from to a certain degree, but I don't necessarily agree with the anti-Kofi mentality. The anti, like, why does he have to be 145 pounds? He's too small. Nah. Because in wrestling, I think in some instances, size does matter and size does help. But because it's a fake fictional world, you can suspend your disbelief if you book it the right way and if you make the characters look good. So that's my opinion on that. That's it for this episode of Review Space. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Click on the bell button for the latest notifications. Click on the bell button for the latest notification. Click on the bell button for the latest notification. I gotta say it multiple times. And until next time, peace.